The brass handle turned half an inch beneath Elena Ward's palm. Then every lock in the Moretti mansion flashed red. Steel shutters crashed over the ballroom windows. Magnetic bolts sealed the doors. The orchestra stopped mid-note as 30 guests turned toward the only woman standing beside the restricted eastern exit. Above the marble archway, a digital clock appeared. 23:00. "Step away from the door," Luca Moretti said. His voice carried across the ballroom without effort. Dressed in a black tuxedo, Luca looked less like the host of a charity dinner than the man every guest knew him to be, the unchallenged head of the Moretti family. Elena released the handle and raised both hands. Her navy inspection jacket stretched across her full figure as 2 guards approached. "You told me to test it," she said. "I told you to confirm the repair." "I did. The lock rejected my fingerprint before it accepted another command." Luca's security chief, Marco Moretti, pushed through the crowd holding a tablet. Luca's cousin had overseen the mansion's defenses for 12 years. Tonight, his usually controlled expression carried something dangerously close to triumph. "The system recorded Elena inside the control room 9 minutes ago," Marco announced. "She disabled the emergency override, sealed every external exit, and armed the fire containment system." Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Elena stared at the tablet. The footage showed her entering the room alone, wearing the same jacket and carrying the same leather tool case now resting beside the door. It was convincing. It was also impossible. At midnight, Marco continued, "The suppressant will discharge through the ventilation network." The clock changed. 22:31. A woman near the orchestra gasped. Several guests rushed toward the main entrance, but its reinforced doors would not move. Luca's gaze never left Elena. "Can you stop it?" "Not from here." "Convenient." She ignored the accusation and studied the lock's narrow diagnostic strip. The red warning light pulsed in sets of 3, followed by a longer pause. That was not the pattern of an automatic emergency lockdown. Someone was issuing live commands from inside the network. Elena crouched beside her tool case. A guard seized her wrist. "Let her work," Luca ordered. The guard released her. Elena opened the case and removed a handheld circuit reader, aware of every suspicious eye following her. 6 months earlier, Luca had hired her engineering firm to inspect the mansion after a series of unexplained power failures. Marco had dismissed every irregularity she found as aging hardware. Now those irregularities had trapped them all. She connected the reader to the diagnostic port. 2 authorization signatures appeared on its screen. The first belonged to her. The second belonged to Luca. Elena's stomach tightened. Luca's private biometric key was supposed to exist only on the ring he wore on his right hand. Yet the system claimed his authorization had entered the network 3 seconds after hers. Someone had cloned them both. She looked past Luca toward the silver-haired man standing near the fireplace. Federal witness Daniel Rourke had arrived under the protection of Moretti guards to finalize an immunity agreement. At midnight, a federal transport team would collect him. His testimony could dismantle the rival Belano organization and expose anyone inside Luca's family who had secretly worked with them. The lockdown was timed to end that testimony before it began. "Elena," Luca said, "what do you see?" She almost answered. Then, the circuit reader displayed a hidden connection routing through Marco's security terminal. Marco was watching her. If she named the route, he could erase it before Luca verified anything. Worse, the terminal controlled the ventilation system. One command could accelerate the countdown. "I need access to the mechanical control chamber," she said carefully, "and nobody should touch the security network." Marco gave a cold laugh. "Because that's where you hid the real controls." "No, because whoever created this lockdown is still inside the system." Marco turned the tablet toward Luca. Her access signature is on every command. We also found an encrypted message she sent 2 hours ago. He opened it. When the doors turn red, Rourke doesn't leave. Elena recognized the sentence. She had sent it to her supervisor after discovering a defect that could trap anyone assigned to Rourke's exit route. Marco had removed everything before and after it. Luca's expression hardened. That message was a warning, Elena said, not an instruction. To whom? Her supervisor's identity was protected under a federal infrastructure contract. Revealing it publicly would expose the only person outside the mansion who possessed an untouched copy of her inspection report. Elena remained silent. Luca mistook that silence for guilt. Confine her in the east study, he ordered. No phone, no tools, no contact with anyone. The guards closed around her. Before they could take the circuit reader, its screen changed. A floor plan appeared, followed by a single blinking marker directly beneath the ballroom. Elena looked at Luca. The suppressant isn't the first threat. A heavy metallic impact sounded under their feet. Then the clock lost 5 minutes. 17:0. Move her, Luca commanded. As the guards pulled Elena toward the study, the ballroom lights went dark, and someone unlocked the sealed service elevator below them. Darkness swallowed the ballroom. Guests shouted. Glass struck marble. Somewhere near the orchestra, a chair overturned. Stay where you are, Elena called. Her voice cut through the panic with enough authority that several people obeyed Bohr, remembering she was supposed to be the prisoner. A white emergency strip flickered on along the floor. Elena watched it illuminate from west to east instead of all at once. Luca moved Rourke away from the fireplace. Luca's silhouette turned toward her. Why? That lighting sequence means the basement circuit is feeding upward. The service elevator will open behind him. Luca crossed the room without another question. He pulled Daniel Rourke aside just as the wall panel behind the fireplace separated with a metallic scrape. The elevator doors opened. No one stood inside. 2 guards aimed their weapons at the empty car while Marco inspected it from a safe distance. Clear, he announced. No, Elena said. Check the weight display. One guard looked at the small panel above the controls. 312 pounds. The elevator appeared empty, but it was carrying the weight of 2 adults. Elena remembered the original plans. There's a maintenance compartment beneath the floor. Marco faced her sharply. That feature isn't on the security drawings. It's on mine. 5 months earlier, Elena had found the concealed compartment while inspecting the elevator's emergency brake. It had once allowed household staff to move valuables between floors without attracting attention. She had recommended sealing it permanently. Marco had signed the completed work order. Luca ordered his men to secure the elevator. Elena listened as they removed the decorative floor and found the compartment open beneath it. Empty. Whoever had entered the mansion was already somewhere inside. The emergency lights brightened. Luca looked toward Elena, then at the guards holding her. Bring her here. Marco stepped between them. She predicted the elevator because she arranged it. If I arranged it, Elena replied, I wouldn't have warned you. You warned him after the compartment was empty. Luca's expression revealed nothing. Can you restore the exits? Yes, but not through the digital network. I designed a mechanical bypass after the first power failure. Marco's head turned toward her. That reaction lasted less than a second, but Elena saw it. Luca did not. When he had hired Ward's structural systems, Luca believed he was purchasing an inspection certificate required for the mansion's insurance renewal. He had never learned that Elena had spent 11 nights reconstructing the building's electrical architecture from handwritten plans dating back 80 years. Every unexplained outage Marco blamed on old wiring had followed the same pattern. A short power loss, a disabled camera, and one restricted door opening for less than 10 seconds. Elena had documented all 7 incidents. Each time, Marco had assured Luca the problem was fixed. Each time, Luca had accepted his cousin's judgment over hers. Yet the mansion depended on Elena's work. The emergency lights, pressure sensors, fire doors, and independent ventilation controls all followed protocols she had written. Marco had placed his own name on the reports presented to Luca, while her signature remained buried in the technical appendices no one read. Now those forgotten pages were the only reason the ballroom still had breathable air and emergency power. "The mechanical bypass is in the lower control chamber," Elena said. "I need my tools." Marco shook his head. "Absolutely not." "Then keep the tools and bring the insulated wrench, the voltage meter, and the blue emergency map." "There is no blue map," Marco said. Elena met his eyes. "It's behind the basement pressure panel." Silence followed. That location had never appeared in the digital records. Elena had created the map after discovering that the mansion's original emergency plans were incomplete. She had shown it to only 2 people, her supervisor and Marco. Luca heard the hesitation. "You knew about it," he said to his cousin. "I knew she left paperwork downstairs. I didn't know what it contained." The answer sounded reasonable, but it came too quickly. Luca ordered a guard to retrieve the map. When the man returned, he carried a rolled sheet of blue waterproof paper and an insulated wrench. Elena took the map but left the wrench on the table. "You said you needed it," Luca observed. "I needed to know whether it was still there." She unrolled the plan. Across every mechanical bypass location, Elena had drawn a small triangle in red grease pencil. The marks were intentionally uneven, impossible to reproduce perfectly from a scanned copy. All but one remained untouched. The triangle beside the ventilation control had been wiped away. Someone had physically opened that panel after her final inspection. Elena showed Luca the faded red smear. "This proves the lockdown wasn't created from the control room alone. Someone modified the ventilation hardware in advance." "Who could reach it?" he asked. "Your security team, household engineers, and anyone authorized by Marco." Marco's jaw tightened, "Including you." "Yes," Elena said, "which is why someone copied my fingerprint." The clock above the door changed again. 13:42. Luca handed her the insulated wrench. "You're coming downstairs with me." Marco moved closer. "That's a mistake." "Then stay here and guard Rourke." For the first time that evening, Marco's composure slipped. Elena rolled up the map. As she did, she noticed a faint rectangular impression near its lower edge, the outline left by a missing label. She held the paper toward the emergency light. Someone had removed the map's original inspection seal. That seal carried a unique serial number linked to Elena's private field notebook. Only one copy of that notebook existed. It had disappeared from her locked office 3 days earlier. 3 days before the lockdown, Elena had arrived at her office to find the door still locked and her private field notebook missing. Nothing else had been disturbed. Her laptop remained on the desk. Cash lay untouched in the emergency drawer. Even the sealed envelope containing the Moretti mansion's original blueprints was exactly where she had left it. Only the notebook was gone. Elena kept no digital copy. It contained hand-drawn circuit paths, inspection seal numbers, and observations she had excluded from the official report until she could verify them. To anyone else, its pages would have looked like a collection of measurements and untidy diagrams. To someone familiar with the mansion, they were a guide to every weakness in its security system. She called Dr. Miriam Cole, Director of Ward Structural Systems and Elena's Federal Compliance Supervisor. "The notebook is missing," Elena said. "Was the lock forced?" "No." "Who has a key?" You and me. Miriam was silent for a moment, then assumed the lock wasn't opened with a key. Elena examined the metal plate beneath the handle. A thin arc crossed its brushed surface, too shallow to notice unless the light caught it correctly. Someone had removed the electronic reader, connected directly to its memory, and restored it afterward. The technique matched the unexplained failures at the Moretti mansion. Miriam instructed her to stop working and bring the evidence to their secured federal office. Elena agreed, then noticed a notification on her computer. Her inspection account had accessed the mansion's ventilation files 12 minutes earlier. She had not logged in that morning. Elena disconnected the computer from the network and opened the offline audit archive. Every authorized engineer carried a unique access signature generated by a hardware token. Hers had appeared 7 times during the mansion's earlier power failures. On each occasion, the system recorded her signature less than 4 seconds before one of Luca Moretti's private authorizations. It could not be coincidence. Someone had cloned both identities and was testing whether the network would accept them together. Elena called Miriam again, but the secure line produced only static. A moment later, a message appeared from Miriam's verified account. Do not contact federal security. Continue the inspection as scheduled. The instruction included their correct emergency passphrase. That frightened Elena more than an obvious fake would have. The passphrase had been written inside the missing notebook. She drove to Miriam's office instead. The 30-minute trip took 22, but when Elena reached the secured building, federal agents had already closed the entrance. A receptionist met her outside. Dr. Cole was taken into protective custody this morning. Why? I'm not authorized to say. Can I speak with her? No one can. The timing severed Elena's only safe communication channel. Calling ordinary law enforcement would expose Daniel Rourke's location and possibly destroy the immunity agreement scheduled for the Moretti charity dinner. Contacting Luca directly meant passing through Marco, who controlled every message entering the mansion. Elena returned to her car and examined the copied access logs. The paired biometric signatures always opened the same hidden function, a dormant emergency bridge connecting the mansion's security network to its fire control system. That bridge should not have existed. She checked the manufacturer's records through an independent service terminal. The device had been purchased by Moretti Protective Holdings 8 months earlier and installed during a renovation Marco supervised. The invoice listed Elena as the approving engineer. Her signature was perfect. The license number beneath it was not. Whoever forged the document had copied the number from her old certification card. Elena had renewed that certification 11 months before the purchase. The mistake proved the invoice had been created from outdated personal records rather than her company database. It was enough to establish fraud, but not enough to identify who had submitted it. She needed the bridge itself. On the afternoon of the charity dinner, Elena entered the mansion under her legitimate inspection authorization. Marco met her in the entrance hall. I thought your work was finished, he said. It will be after I test the eastern exit. Marco smiled without warmth. Then I'll make sure you have access. He escorted her through 2 checkpoints and remained beside her until a guard summoned him to the ballroom. Elena waited until his footsteps faded, then entered the restricted control room. The emergency bridge was mounted behind the main ventilation panel. Its indicator light blinked green. Active. Elena connected her circuit reader and found an outgoing data stream carrying the mansion's occupancy count, door status, and Rourke's protection route to an encrypted receiver outside the property. Someone was tracking where Rourke would stand when the lockdown began. She could not identify the receiver without allowing another transmission, and every transmission placed him in greater danger. Elena chose the only safe option available. She removed the bridge's wireless relay. The ventilation controls immediately switched to local mode. That action would prevent anyone outside the mansion from triggering the suppressant system, but it also disabled the central emergency override until the relay could be replaced. A security camera above the door rotated toward her. Elena stared at it. The camera had been pointed at the hallway when she entered. Now it was recording her holding the missing relay beside the disabled control panel. She understood the trap too late. The bridge had been installed so that removing it, the correct safety procedure, would make her appear to be sabotaging the system. Elena placed the relay in a shielded evidence pouch and hurried toward the ballroom. She tried to send Miriam a warning through the only remaining secured channel. When the doors turn red, Rourke doesn't leave. Keep the federal team away until I confirm the route. The message transmitted, but its confirmation code was wrong. Someone else had received it. Behind Elena, the control room door clicked shut. Marco stood at the end of the corridor, holding his tablet. For one quiet second, neither of them moved. Then Marco glanced at the evidence pouch in Elena's hand and smiled. "You found it," he said. The ballroom doors began to close. "You installed that bridge," Elena said. Marco continued toward her. "According to every record, you did. The invoice used an expired license number. A minor clerical error. It proves the signature was copied from an old file. It proves you make mistakes." Elena backed toward the ballroom, keeping the shielded evidence pouch behind her. Marco had no weapon visible, but he did not need one. He controlled the cameras, the guards, and every record Luca would examine. "You were sending Rourke's location outside the mansion," she said. Marco stopped smiling. "Give me the relay." "No. If you walk into that ballroom carrying stolen security equipment, Luca will assume exactly what the evidence tells him. Then let him examine it. You still believe facts matter before trust." Before Elena could respond, Marco tapped his tablet. The corridor lights failed. A side door opened behind her, and someone struck the evidence pouch from her hand. Elena drove her shoulder into the attacker, recovered the pouch, and ran. She reached the ballroom seconds before Marco entered through another door, calm and unhurried. Luca stood near the eastern exit. "Try the handle," he told her. When Elena obeyed, the lock flashed red. The lockdown began. Now, less than 20 minutes later, she descended toward the lower control chamber beside the same man who had ordered her confinement. Luca carried the blue map. Elena held the insulated wrench. 2 armed guards followed them through the narrow stone passage. "Tell me what Marco isn't saying," Luca demanded. "He authorized the renovation that installed the emergency bridge. That doesn't prove he knew about it. He knew about the hidden map. So did you." Elena stopped on the stairs. "If you've already decided I'm guilty, take the wrench and repair it yourself. I decided you were dangerous." "There's a difference?" "Yes, guilt can wait. The people upstairs cannot." It was the closest Luca had come to admitting that he needed her. They reached the lower chamber. Copper pipes covered the walls, surrounding an old mechanical control wheel. The ventilation panel stood open. Elena examined its interior. The wireless relay she had removed was back in place. "That's impossible," she whispered. She still had the original inside the shielded pouch clipped beneath her jacket. Someone had installed a duplicate during the lockdown. Luca watched her remove the pouch. "What is that?" "The relay I took from the control room." One of the guards seized it and handed it to Luca. Marco's voice came through Luca's radio. "Search the pouch." Luca opened it. Beneath the relay lay a slim black transmitter Elena had never seen before. Its indicator pulsed in rhythm with the countdown upstairs. Marco spoke again. That transmitter is controlling the ventilation release. Elena stared at the device. The attacker in the corridor had not been trying to steal the pouch. He had planted something inside it. Check for fingerprints, she said. We don't have time, Luca replied. Then compare its serial number with the purchase invoice. I already did, Marco said over the radio. The unit was purchased through Ward Structural Systems. A document appeared on Luca's phone. It showed Elena's company account receiving $200,000 from a Bolano-controlled contractor. The payment had arrived that morning. The money was real. Elena recognized the account number. It belonged to a restricted project fund Miriam managed. With Miriam in federal custody, no one could explain why the transfer had been accepted. Marco forged the invoice, Elena said. He intercepted my message and planted this transmitter. From the ballroom, Marco asked, in front of 30 witnesses. Luca's silence became heavier. Elena saw the decision forming before he spoke. His entire life had taught him that family loyalty was the only certainty in a world built on betrayal. Marco had protected him since childhood. Elena was an outside contractor with unexplained money, stolen equipment, and a message stating that Rourke would not leave. Luca had compelling reasons to doubt her. But doubt did not excuse what followed. Give Marco the relay, he ordered. Elena's grip tightened around the pouch. If he gets this, he can erase the original firmware. Give it to him. No. Luca took one step closer. This relay contains the outgoing transmission record. It may be the only evidence showing where Rourke's location was sent. And you expect me to let you control it. I expect you to protect the evidence instead of your cousin. Something changed in Luca's face. Confine her, he told the guards. If she resists, take the pouch by force. Elena looked at him for a long second. You're not choosing evidence, she said quietly. You're choosing blood. The guards moved toward her. The ventilation wheel behind them suddenly rotated. A hidden panel opened in the stone wall, revealing the narrow maintenance passage marked on Elena's map. A masked man emerged and reached for the pouch. Elena swung the insulated wrench into his forearm, forcing him back without waiting for Luca's guards. She pulled the mechanical release beside the passage and dropped a steel barrier between them. The attacker was trapped on Luca's side. Elena was trapped on the other. Open it, Luca ordered. I can't, one guard answered. The release is one way. Elena heard Marco's voice through the attacker's radio. Take the evidence, leave Ward downstairs. That was enough to prove Marco's involvement to her, but the steel barrier muffled the words before Luca could hear them clearly. Elena ran deeper into the passage as the countdown reached 9 minutes. The tunnel divided ahead. One route returned to the ballroom ventilation shaft. The other led beyond the mansion's perimeter through an abandoned drainage channel. She could still go upstairs and try to save the people who believed she had betrayed them. Or she could carry the relay to the only independent technician capable of preserving its data. Elena chose the evidence. Behind her, the steel barrier began to rise. She disappeared into the drainage tunnel moments before Luca entered the passage. All he found was her broken identification badge beside an open route leading away from the mansion. The countdown stopped at 17 seconds. Every red light in the mansion turned white. The suppressant warning vanished, but the steel shutters remained locked and the ventilation system refused to restart. Marco announced that Elena must have canceled the attack after escaping beyond the perimeter. For several minutes, Luca believed him. Then the ballroom temperature began to rise. Without Elena, no one understood how the old mechanical system interacted with the modern controls. Marco's engineers issued commands that produced new error codes. 2 guards tried forcing the main entrance and triggered another security seal. Luca returned to the lower chamber carrying Elena's blue map. She had marked 3 manual pressure valves with handwritten instructions. Following them in sequence, he restored airflow to the ballroom and released 1 emergency exit. She had left them a way out. That was the first contradiction. If Elena had designed the lockdown to kill Rourke, she could have taken the map with her. Instead, she had preserved the one tool capable of saving everyone after the digital system failed. By 11:56 p.m., Luca moved the guests into the secured courtyard. Daniel Rourke remained inside with 4 guards because the federal collection team had not arrived. Marco urged Luca to cancel the immunity agreement. "That is what this attack was designed to accomplish," Luca said. "And continuing could get Rourke killed. Canceling gives the Belanos exactly what they want." Marco's expression remained controlled. "You're assuming they're responsible." "I'm assuming someone wants me to make a decision before I examine the evidence." Luca returned to the control room alone. Elena's circuit reader was still connected to the diagnostic port. Marco had attempted to erase its temporary memory, but the device stored its last 10 readings on an independent chip. Luca removed the chip and inserted it into an offline terminal. 2 biometric signatures appeared. Elena's authorization had been rejected. His had been accepted 3 seconds later. Luca looked at the black onyx ring on his right hand. Its private authorization key had never left his possession. Elena had never touched it, and the ring could not transmit from beyond 6 inches without a paired receiver. For her plan to work, she would have needed access to both the ring and the mansion's protected registration terminal. Marco controlled that terminal. The second contradiction was technical. The system had displayed Elena's identity publicly, but it had not actually accepted her fingerprint. Someone had wanted the guests to see her name while using Luca's cloned authorization to control the locks. A guard entered carrying the black transmitter planted in Elena's pouch. It had fallen beneath the steel barrier during the struggle. "The serial number matches the purchase invoice," the guard said. Luca opened the casing. A production stamp was engraved inside. The transmitter had been manufactured 6 weeks after the date Elena supposedly purchased it. The invoice was false. "Who verified this document?" Luca asked. "Marco's financial analyst." "Bring him to me." He left the property during the power failure. Every vehicle exit had been sealed during the lockdown. Luca checked the service records and discovered one exception. A security car had departed through the north gate 7 minutes before Elena touched the handle. Marco had authorized it. The driver field was blank. Luca found Marco beside Rourke in the library. "The intruder downstairs," Luca said. "Did your men identify him?" "He escaped through the drainage tunnel." "Which outlet?" "The northern outlet." Luca studied his cousin. The tunnel divided behind the steel barrier. Elena's blue map showed 3 possible routes, but the surveillance system did not cover any of them. No guard had reported which path the intruder used. Marco knew something he should not have known. That was the third contradiction. Luca did not accuse him. A premature confrontation would give Marco time to destroy whatever remained, and might place Rourke in immediate danger. Instead, Luca handed him a phone displaying a false security report. "My men found Elena's badge near the Federal Records Annex," Luca said. "She may be going there to meet Miriam Cole." Marco read the report. "Send a team." "I already have." Luca left the library and contacted Security Lieutenant Tomas Vale through an analog radio channel Marco could not monitor. "Watch the Federal Annex," Luca ordered. "Do not approach. Record everyone who arrives." 9 minutes later, Tomas reported 2 men entering the alley behind the annex. They wore Belano colors and carried forged federal credentials. Luca had told no one about the annex except Marco. It was not enough to prove his cousin had designed the entire conspiracy. Marco might be protecting another family interest or following an order he believed Luca had issued, but it proved he was feeding information to armed men outside the mansion. Luca returned to Elena's abandoned tool case. Inside, beneath a foam divider, he found carbon copies of 7 malfunction reports. Each documented a camera failure followed by a restricted door opening. Elena had submitted every report to Marco. None had reached Luca. The final page contained a handwritten protocol. If digital evidence is compromised, preserve original firmware through halcyon analog forensics. No network connection, no courier. Deliver by hand. Below it was the name of a technician, Jonah Pierce. Luca searched the mansion's vendor archive. Halcyon had closed 4 years earlier, but an old invoice listed a workshop address beside an elevated railway in Queens. It was 40 minutes away under normal conditions. Elena had chosen the drainage route leading north, toward Queens. Luca called Tomas again. Return without being seen. Prepare 1 vehicle with no digital tracking. What about Marco? He cannot know I'm leaving. And Rourke. The federal collection continues at midnight. Publicly, nothing changes. Luca looked through the library doorway. Marco stood beside the witness, calmly checking his watch. Midnight arrived. No federal vehicle appeared. Instead, the mansion received a message from Miriam Cole's secured account. Elena Ward has taken Daniel Rourke. Do not trust Luca Moretti. Rourke was still standing inside the library. The message was not intended to deceive Luca. It was meant to redirect the federal team toward Elena. Luca reached the Queen's workshop at 12:43 a.m. The faded sign above the steel door still read Halcyon Analog Forensics, though the surrounding warehouses had been abandoned for years. No lights showed through the windows. Tomas checked the alley. No federal vehicles. They won't announce themselves. Luca approached the entrance without his usual security detail. He had left every trackable phone, watch, and vehicle at the mansion. The sedan parked nearby belonged to a catering company Tomas trusted. Luca knocked 3 times. Nothing moved. Then a woman's voice came through an old speaker above the door. Take off the ring. Luca looked at the black onyx authorization ring on his hand. Elena. The ring is compromised. Put it inside the metal box beside the door. A small compartment opened in the wall. Luca removed the ring and placed it inside. The compartment sealed, isolating the biometric transmitter. Send Tomas back to the car, Elena said. No. Then the door stays closed. Luca glanced at Tomas. The lieutenant stepped away without argument. A series of mechanical locks released. Inside, Elena stood behind a reinforced glass partition. Dirt marked her inspection jacket, and a dark bruise had formed around one wrist from the struggle in the basement. She held no weapon. She did not need one. The workshop contained manual locks, pressure alarms, and analog recording equipment that could not be accessed through the mansion's network. An older man with silver hair sat at a workbench examining the relay beneath a magnifying lamp. Jonah Pierce had once designed emergency systems for federal courthouses. According to the records Luca found, he had also trained Elena during her first years as an engineer. You brought him here, Jonah asked her. I let him enter, Elena replied. That isn't the same thing. Luca stepped closer to the partition. The federal team received a message saying you abducted Rourke. Rourke was still at your mansion when it was sent. I know. Knowing now doesn't change what you did downstairs. Luca accepted the accusation without defending himself. Marco intercepted the false location I gave him. 2 men arrived at the federal annex 9 minutes later. Elena's expression shifted, but the glass between them remained. That proves he leaked the location, she said. It doesn't prove he built the system. This might. Jonah turned a monitor toward Luca. The original relay's memory had been copied onto a read-only physical disk. Its firmware contained a maintenance certificate issued by a shell company called Northline Security. Luca recognized the name. Northline provided protection for 3 warehouses controlled by the Bellano family. 6 months earlier, Marco had recommended purchasing the company to bring those properties under Moretti's surveillance. Luca had approved the acquisition. "You gave Marco legal access to Bellano equipment," Elena said. "I believed he was watching them. He was building a channel between both organizations." Jonah opened another record. Every stolen biometric command had passed through a Northline maintenance terminal before reaching the mansion. Marco had not merely hidden an enemy connection. He had constructed one using Luca's authorization. "The plan needed your fingerprint, Elena's identity, and Rourke inside the same building," Jonah explained. "The lockdown created a public record showing Elena as the attacker. The false federal message then made her appear to have taken the witness." "What happens next?" Luca asked. Elena answered. "The federal team searches for me while the real extraction route is left exposed." Luca turned toward the workshop entrance. "Thomas," he called. No response came from outside. Elena reached for the lights. They went out before she touched the switch. A vehicle stopped in the alley. Doors opened. Jonah removed the relay from the workbench and placed it inside a small fireproof cassette. "Federal team?" he asked. "No," Luca said. "They would identify themselves." A voice outside ordered them to open the workshop under federal authority. Elena checked a narrow viewing mirror positioned above the entrance. "Same forged credentials your men saw at the annex." Luca moved toward the door. Elena blocked his path. "If they see you, they'll report that I'm holding you too." "They already know I'm here." "No, they followed your ring." The metal isolation box beside the entrance had begun emitting a faint pulse. Someone outside was attempting to activate Luca's biometric key remotely. Elena pulled a manual lever. Dropping the box through a chute into a sealed chamber beneath the floor, the signal disappeared. A heavy impact shook the front door. Luca reached inside his jacket. "If you start a fight in this workshop, the federal team will treat everyone inside as hostile," Elena warned. "Then what do you suggest?" "You follow my instructions." Another impact bent the outer lock. Elena directed Jonah toward a service lift at the rear of the building. She opened an electrical cabinet and removed 2 ceramic fuses, cutting power to the front section, while preserving the lift's mechanical brake. The attackers forced open the outer door and entered a dark, empty room. Elena activated an old inspection speaker near the opposite wall. Jonah's recorded voice played from it, drawing the intruders away from the rear passage. Luca watched her calculate their movement through vibrations in the workshop floor. She waited until both men crossed a pressure plate, then released a steel fire partition between them and the service lift. "Now," she said. They entered the lift as the partition began to shake under repeated strikes. The lift descended slowly. Its motor had not worked in years. Elena controlled the brake by hand, lowering them 1 level at a time. Luca noticed the strain in her injured wrist. "Let me take it." "No. You can't hold that lever for 3 floors." "I can hold it long enough." The cable jerked. Elena shifted her weight and locked the brake into the next notch, stopping their fall before Luca could intervene. She had saved herself in the tunnel. Now she had saved the evidence, Jonah, and him without relying on a single digital system. Respect replaced the suspicion Luca had carried into the workshop. At the basement level, Elena opened a concealed loading door leading beneath the railway. Tomas waited there, having followed her emergency signal through an old handheld receiver. Jonah handed Elena the fireproof cassette. The copy is verified, he said, but it proves only access and method. It doesn't prove Marco's objective or his final order. Elena faced Luca. What public event requires Rourke's testimony? The Moretti Council meets tomorrow night at the waterfront courthouse, Luca said. Rourke's immunity statement will authorize a federal seizure of Bolano-controlled shipping assets. The council must approve transferring those assets into our legitimate port company. And if you fail to appear, emergency authority passes to Marco. The first layer of the conspiracy became clear. Marco needed Rourke discredited or dead, Luca accused of obstructing the federal agreement, and the council frightened enough to give him control of the waterfront empire. The meeting could not be canceled. Without the transfer vote, the Bolanos would move the shipping assets beyond federal reach within 48 hours. Elena looked toward the tunnel exit. I'll help expose him, she said, but I set the evidence plan. You don't command me, confine me, or hide information. Luca met her gaze, agreed. If you choose Marco over the facts again, I walk away with the relay. Agreed. For the first time, Luca Moretti placed control in someone else's hands. Above them, the workshop's alarm stopped. The attackers had withdrawn. Then Tomas's radio received a single message from the mansion. Daniel Rourke had disappeared from the library. Daniel Rourke had not been taken by force. A forged federal transfer order had arrived at the mansion 3 minutes after midnight. It carried Miriam Cole's credentials and Luca's biometric authorization. Believing the document legitimate, Rourke's guards escorted him into an armored vehicle waiting at the west entrance. Marco had personally approved the departure. He's moving faster because he knows you doubt him, Elena said. They gathered inside Tomas's untracked sedan beneath the railway. Jonah connected the verified relay copy to a battery-powered reader while Luca contacted the mansion through an analog radio. Where was Rourke taken? Luca asked. A guard checked the paper transfer log. The waterfront courthouse holding suite. The courthouse was also the location of the Moretti Council meeting, scheduled for the following evening. Marco had moved the witness directly into the center of his plan. Luca ordered the guards not to interfere. If they attempted to retrieve Rourke, Marco could portray the action as obstruction of federal custody. Worse, the legitimate federal team was already searching for Elena under false information. They needed evidence that could survive public scrutiny. Jonah arranged the records across the back seat. The first level proves the official story is false, he said. Elena's signature was rejected, the transmitter was manufactured after its invoice date, and the warning system was manipulated. Suspicion, Elena said. Enough to reopen the case, not enough to name Marco. Jonah displayed the relay's firmware certificate beside the renovation records. The second level links Northline equipment to Marco's authorized installation. Add the false annex location and the hidden malfunction reports, and you have means and access. But not intent, Luca said. Or the final order, Elena added. Marco could argue that a Northline technician abused equipment he had installed legitimately. He could deny knowing about the biometric clones and claim that sending men to the annex was an attempt to recover Elena. They needed him to use the compromised system again after receiving information known only to him. Luca suggested canceling the courthouse vote and forcing Marco to act elsewhere. Elena rejected the idea. The shipping assets leave federal reach in less than 48 hours. If the council doesn't approve the transfer tomorrow, the Bolanos move ownership through offshore companies. Marco wins without exposing himself. He also controls the courthouse security contractor. That's why he chose it. It's also why he'll believe he controls every record. Elena studied the building plans. The courthouse's modern access system had been installed over an older pneumatic document network. Before electronic filing, sealed orders traveled between chambers through brass tubes operated by air pressure. The digital controls had been retired. The physical tubes remained. "We use both systems," she said. "The digital one is bait, the old one is our fallback." Their plan required 3 versions of the same false information. Luca contacted Marco and claimed federal agents had recovered a backup deposition recorded by Rourke before the lockdown. According to Luca, Elena would deliver it to Judge Helena Price 1 hour before the council vote. Tomas separately told the mansion's deputy security chief that the deposition would arrive through the courthouse's underground records entrance. Jonah prepared a 3rd message stating that the evidence would be stored in the judge's private digital archive. That message was placed in a compromised email account Marco's analyst had previously accessed. Each version identified a different route. Whichever route Marco targeted would reveal the channel he controlled. Elena then prepared the real evidence. Jonah copied the relay firmware, false invoice, access logs, and Northline certificate onto 3 read-only disks. He sealed each inside a numbered envelope bearing matching pressure impressions made by an antique courthouse stamp in his collection. The first copy would remain with Jonah. Tomas would deliver the second to Miriam Cole's federal protection officer. Elena would carry the third into the courthouse. "If the digital record disappears," she explained, "the seal impressions and matching disk hashes establish that all 3 copies existed before the vote." "And if they take your copy?" Luca asked. "They still lose." "You're assuming Miriam's protection officer isn't compromised." "I'm assuming one channel may fail. That's why there are 3. Luca nodded. He did not alter her plan or issue instructions over it. At 2:10 a.m., Tomas received a photograph from a courthouse maintenance employee he trusted. It showed Daniel Rourke entering the federal holding suite unharmed. 2 Northline guards stood outside. Rourke was alive but isolated. Elena enlarged the image. One guard wore a temporary access badge printed less than an hour earlier. The badge number matched a command inside the stolen relay. Marco was still using the cloned authorization system. They now had proof that the same mechanism responsible for the mansion lockdown had opened Rourke's holding suite, but the command was automated. It did not identify the person who issued it. "We force a manual response," Elena said. She instructed Jonah to insert a harmless tracking checksum into the fake deposition's digital file name. It would not transmit or collect information. It merely created a unique error when someone tried opening it through Northline's administrative terminal. Only the recipient of the 3rd message would know the file existed. At 2:27 a.m., the file registered an access attempt. Northline Terminal 7. Marco's private courthouse office. Luca stared at the result. That connects him to the bait. "Still not enough," Elena said. "He can claim someone used his terminal." A second command appeared. Marco's office had reassigned 3 guards from Rourke's suite to Judge Price's digital archive. He had acted on the false information. The counter-trap was working. Then the courthouse agenda updated. A new emergency item had been added before the waterfront transfer vote. Removal of Luca Moretti as managing authority for federal noncompliance. Appointment of Marco Moretti as interim successor. Attached beneath it was a second motion. Detention of Elena Ward as the architect of the Rourke conspiracy. Marco was not planning to hide her accusation. He intended to make it the foundation of his public victory. Luca looked at Elena. "You don't have to enter that building." "Yes, I do. He controls the exits. He thinks I'll rely on the doors." Elena rolled up the courthouse's old pneumatic tube map. "Tomorrow night," she said, "we let Marco win the vote." The waterfront courthouse opened under federal supervision at 7 the following evening. By then, Marco had adapted. Tomas was detained outside the federal district office under a fabricated obstruction order. Miriam Cole's protection officer was removed from the Rourke case after an anonymous complaint. Federal agents seized Jonah's workshop before he could deliver his copy of the relay evidence. 3 independent evidence routes had become 1. Elena carried the last verified disk beneath her inspection jacket. She entered the courthouse through an abandoned utility passage connected to the old pneumatic system. Her bruised wrist had stiffened overnight, forcing her to operate the heavy valves with both hands. Above her, the Moretti council assembled inside the ceremonial chamber. Luca sat alone at the defense table. Marco occupied the opposite side with 2 family attorneys and the director of Northline Security. Judge Helena Price presided over the transfer vote as federal observers filled the front row. Daniel Rourke waited behind a secured glass partition under the watch of Northline guards. Every public entrance had been locked when the hearing began. Marco presented his case first. Security footage showed Elena removing the emergency relay. Financial records showed the Bolano payment entering her company account. Her warning message appeared on the central screen without the missing context. When the doors turn red, Rourke doesn't leave. Then Marco played footage of Elena escaping through the drainage tunnel while the mansion remained sealed. She created the emergency, he told the council, stole the equipment that could explain it, and fled when confronted. No one mentioned the blue map she had left behind. No one mentioned that her rejected biometric signature had never controlled the locks. Marco called Daniel Rourke. Rourke entered the chamber holding the forged transfer order that had removed him from the mansion. He did not accuse Elena of abducting him. He testified only to what he knew. The order carried Ms. Ward's federal contractor certificate, he said. Her access signature appeared beside Mr. Moretti's authorization. Marco did not need Rourke to lie. He needed the truth stripped of context. Beneath the chamber, Elena reached the pneumatic routing room and opened the cabinet marked Judicial Delivery. The brass tube leading to Judge Price's desk had been removed. A new tube redirected every capsule toward Marco's private office. He had discovered the fallback. Elena examined the fittings. They were recent, but the courthouse's original pressure labels had been preserved. Marco expected her to send the evidence through the system and intended to intercept it before it reached the judge. She inserted a sealed capsule anyway. Upstairs, Luca received a message from Marco through the council clerk. Ward is inside the building. Defend her and Rourke's transfer disappears. Luca looked toward the glass partition. Marco had placed the witness beside an emergency door, controlled by Northline. If Luca disrupted the hearing too early, Marco could remove Rourke before federal observers understood what was happening. Judge Price called for Luca's response. He stood. Elena Ward concealed evidence, entered a restricted control room, and left my property during an active emergency, he said. Every camera in the chamber turned toward him. Elena heard his words through a maintenance speaker below. They had agreed on the statement. She knew why he was saying it, but hearing him repeat the accusation before the same people who had already judged her still cut deeper than she expected. I will not ask this council to trust her, Luca continued. Marco relaxed. That was what they needed. If Marco believed Luca still distrusted Elena, he would complete the transfer using the compromised system instead of destroying it and escaping. Judge Price called the first vote. 7 council members supported removing Luca as managing authority. 2 opposed, 1 abstained. The motion passed. Marco Moretti became interim successor. Applause rose from the Northline representatives. Marco approached the central authorization terminal, where the waterfront assets could be transferred into temporary management. Elena's capsule reached his private office below. A Northline guard opened it. Inside was no disk. It contained a handwritten note. You copied the wrong authorization. An alarm sounded in the routing room. Marco had anticipated a decoy. The archive door locked behind Elena, and pressure began draining from the pneumatic network. Without airflow, she could not send another capsule anywhere. Northline guards entered the utility passage from both sides. Elena climbed onto the maintenance platform and opened the oldest section of the courthouse plans. One route remained unmarked on the public diagrams, a narrow gravity line built to return rejected judicial orders to the basement archive. It had no pressure controls and no digital lock, but its opening was too small for the evidence cassette. She removed the disc from its protective case, wrapped it inside the original inspection map, and pushed it into the return line. The paper caught halfway. Footsteps approached. Elena used the insulated wrench to strike the outside of the brass tube, advancing the package several inches at a time. Her injured wrist weakened with each impact. Above, Marco began the final asset transfer. The terminal requested Luca's biometric authorization. Marco placed a cloned black onyx ring against the reader. The system accepted it. A federal observer leaned toward Judge Price. If that transfer is certified, Northline controls the seized shipping assets immediately. Luca remained silent. The transfer bar reached 70%. In the utility passage, a Northline guard appeared at the far end. "Elena Ward," he ordered, "step away from the tube." Elena struck it once more. The wrapped disc disappeared into the gravity line. The guard seized her before she could see where it landed. In the chamber, the transfer reached 98%. Marco smiled at Luca. "Blood was the only evidence you ever needed." Luca lowered his eyes, appearing defeated. The transfer reached 100%. Judge Price raised the certification stamp. At that moment, an old brass bell rang beneath her desk. A dented pneumatic capsule rolled from a forgotten return slot and stopped beside her hand. Judge Price lowered the certification stamp without touching the document. "Open the capsule," she ordered. A federal clerk removed the folded inspection map and found the read-only disc inside. Marco immediately stepped forward. "That material came from an accused saboteur. It has no verified chain of custody." "The seal does," Luca said. The clerk compared the pressure impression on the envelope with the time-stamped registration Jonah Pierce had submitted to the courthouse archive that afternoon. Although federal agents had seized his workshop, his preservation request had entered the judicial system before Marco blocked the other copies. Judge Price ordered the disc examined on an isolated court terminal. Marco maintained his composure. Even if the firmware and access logs were authenticated, they established only that Northline equipment had been misused. They did not prove he had ordered the lockdown or forged Elena's identity. "Bring Ms. Ward into the chamber," the judge said. The doors opened. 2 Northline guards escorted Elena inside. Her jacket was dusty from the utility passage, and she held her bruised wrist close to her side. She looked neither at Marco nor the counsel. She faced the judge. "The disc contains 3 separate records," Elena said. "The first proves my biometric signature was displayed but rejected during the lockdown. The second connects the accepted commands to Northline's maintenance network. The third is a controlled checksum created after the lockdown." Marco's attorney rose. "A checksum created by Ms. Ward proves nothing." "Not by itself," Elena agreed. "Ask the court technician where it was accessed." The technician reviewed the courthouse's independent audit log. "Northline Terminal 7, he said, "located in Mr. Marco Moretti's private office." Marco responded without hesitation. "My staff uses that terminal." Elena had expected the answer. "Then ask when the file name became public." The technician compared the timestamps. The fake deposition file had been accessed 14 minutes before any message mentioning it entered the courthouse network. Only Luca, Elena, Jonah, and the recipient of the compromised account knew the file existed. Jonah was under federal supervision. Elena was inside the utility passage. Luca had been visible in the chamber. The access originated from Marco's office. Marco offered a second explanation. Someone fed my terminal false credentials to implicate me. Ward already demonstrated that she can manipulate access signatures. Elena turned toward the central authorization terminal. No, I demonstrated that someone could display a stolen identity while using a different authorization underneath it. She asked the clerk to open the authentication path for the waterfront transfer Marco had just completed. The court terminal showed Luca's name. Then the technician expanded the underlying certificate. The key had not originated from Luca's original ring. It came from a maintenance duplicate generated through Northline Terminal 7. Marco had used the same cloned authorization system that controlled the mansion lockdown. Still, he refused to surrender. Northline issued emergency duplicates during the renovation. Luca approved that work. That was your first mistake, Elena said. You copied the certificate stored in my missing notebook. She placed the old license record beside the duplicate certificate. Both carried the number from her expired engineering card. When you forged the installation invoice, you used an outdated number. When you generated Luca's duplicate ring, you used the authorization table recorded on the page opposite that number. A unique calibration error appeared in both files. One reverse digit Elena had corrected in every official digital record, but not in her handwritten notebook. The forged invoice and Marco's cloned ring came from the same stolen source. That established method and knowing access. Judge Price looked toward the completed asset transfer. And motive? Elena asked the clerk to reveal the full destination agreement Marco had submitted. The public screen changed. The seized shipping assets had not been transferred into Moretti Port Holdings, as the council had authorized. They had been assigned to Northline operations under an emergency management contract. The contract granted its controlling beneficiary permanent authority if Luca was removed for federal noncompliance. The beneficiary was Marco Moretti. His victory had created the final proof. Marco's office accessed the controlled bait. His duplicate ring carried the stolen calibration error. His signed transfer placed the waterfront assets under his personal control. 3 independent records now established objective participation and decisive action. Marco looked toward the Northline guards. "Remove Rourke," he ordered. The guards moved toward the glass partition. Elena reached for the courthouse fire control lever beside the clerk's station. Marco smiled. "That system is digital. The new one is." She pulled the mechanical lever. Before entering the routing room, Elena had redirected the old pneumatic pressure line into the emergency door actuator. The same system Marco considered obsolete now drove a steel partition between Rourke and the Northline guards. The witness remained safely inside the federal enclosure. Marco activated the cloned ring, attempting to unlock the side exit. Every access light flashed red. Elena had not disabled the doors. She had instructed the court technician, through the evidence disk, to place the building into judicial evidence mode the moment the stolen certificate appeared. Under that mode, cloned credentials were rejected and authority transferred to the courthouse's federal marshals. The chamber doors opened from the outside. Federal officers entered under Judge Price's direct order. Northline security stepped back. Marco looked at Luca as if blood loyalty could still save him. Luca did not move. "You gave Elena's warning to the men hunting her," he said. "You trapped Rourke, turned my authority into your weapon, and expected me to protect you because we share a name." Marco's face finally lost its calm. Judge Price suspended the asset transfer and restored Luca's status pending federal review. She ordered Marco's financial accounts, Northline terminals, and courthouse office preserved for investigation. Then she addressed the cameras. The evidence presented against Elena Ward was manufactured through cloned credentials and falsified records. She is not responsible for the Moretti mansion lockdown or Daniel Rourke's unlawful transfer. The accusation that had spread publicly was reversed in the same room where Marco intended to make it permanent. As federal officers escorted him away, Marco looked back at Elena. "You think he chose you?" Elena met his gaze. "No," she said. "He finally chose the evidence." 6 weeks later, the federal investigation confirmed every major element of Elena's evidence. Marco Moretti was charged with conspiracy, identity fraud, witness interference, and unlawful control of seized assets. Northline Security lost its courthouse contracts, while its financial records exposed the payments used to compromise mansion employees and falsify Elena's company account. Daniel Rourke completed his testimony under independent federal protection. The Belano shipping assets entered lawful receivership instead of Marco's private company. Miriam Cole was cleared and released from protective custody. Jonah Pierce recovered his equipment, though he sent Luca an invoice for the damaged workshop door with an additional line marked avoidable inconvenience. Luca paid it without negotiation. The consequences inside the Moretti organization were equally permanent. Marco's supporters lost their council position. Every security contract underwent outside review. No family member could authorize biometric credentials without 2 independent approvals. Luca also ordered the complete record of Elena's work published to the council, federal investigators, and every guest present during the lockdown. The reports Marco had buried now carried their rightful author's name. Elena attended the public hearing only because Judge Price requested her testimony. When it ended, Luca approached the microphone before she could leave. "Elena Ward warned me that the evidence had been manipulated," he said before the council and cameras. "I ignored her because trusting my family was easier than questioning the system that protected my authority." Elena watched him without expression. "I confined her, threatened to take her evidence, and made her escape necessary. My decision placed her in greater danger. Nothing Marco did excuses what I chose." There was no explanation disguised as an apology. "I was wrong," Luca said, "and Elena deserved better from me." He stepped away from the microphone without asking for forgiveness. 3 days later, Elena received a contract from Moretti Port Holdings. It offered her permanent control of infrastructure security, an executive salary, and authority equal to Luca's on all safety decisions. She returned it unsigned. Luca came to her office that afternoon. "You rejected the position," he said. "I rejected employment. What do you want instead?" "An independent firm, my own staff, direct access to every record, the authority to stop any operation that fails inspection even if you approved it. That gives you power over the entire port. It gives safety power over the port." Luca considered the distinction. "Agreed. I'm not finished. My reports remain mine. You don't bury findings to protect the family, and if you ever order me confined again, the contract ends immediately." "Agreed." Elena studied him, searching for resistance and finding none. "Then have your attorneys rewrite it." When she returned to the Moretti mansion a month later, the repaired eastern exit waited beneath a restored marble archway. Luca stood beside it, holding no guards, no tablet, and no authority over her decision. Elena placed her hand on the brass handle. The lock flashed green. "Try the handle," Luca said. She opened the door. Cool evening air entered the ballroom. Nothing sealed behind her, no alarm sounded. She could step inside or walk away. Luca remained where he was. "You're not going to tell me which direction to choose?" she asked. "No." That answer mattered more than the open door. Elena stepped into the ballroom and handed him the revised partnership agreement. Her signature appeared beside his, not beneath it. "This doesn't mean I trust you completely," she said. I know. Trust requires evidence. A faint smile touched Luca's face. Then I'll spend the time earning it. Elena looked back at the open exit, confirming that it remained unlocked. Only then did she choose to stay.